the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of KevinMD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/follow. Today, we welcome back on the show Karla Lester. She's a pediatrician, and her most recent KevinMD article is Don't Be in a Hurry to Fast. Karla, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And again, so grateful. All of us physicians are so grateful to you, Kevin, for your incredible platform.
Now, for those who didn't get a chance to listen to our first few episodes together, just briefly share your story and journey to where you're.
Well, like you said, I'm a pediatrician. I've been a pediatrician for a long time. I call myself a community pediatrician in all aspects of that word. I think I've done everything in the field of pediatrics that you could do. I'm a professionally certified life and weight loss coach. I'm a certified diplomate of the American Board of Obesity Medicine. And I'm also somebody who's gone through my own life and weight journey and lost 57 pounds and started in September 2017 and never thought I'd have a weight issue and had been addressing the childhood obesity epidemic for now almost 20 years of my career. And I've done basically everything you could do, started a nonprofit, started a clinic, led that clinic, learned so much. And then when I had my own weight issue, it just was such a helpful journey and learned, oh gosh, we've gotten it all wrong. And within that, I used fasting as one of the tools and learned a lot about it. And it was super helpful to me. And I'm on, as you know, social media a lot, especially on TikTok. And I've even written up one of my TikTok studies that I did and posted on KevinMD, did a podcast interview with you about it on weight, stigma, and bias in healthcare. And I'm really excited about all that work. But anyway, on social media, there are even amazing registered dietitians and other physicians who really blast fasting as a tool and say that it's a diet, it's calorie restriction, it's just starving yourself. And it just seems like there's so much confusion out there. And I know as physicians, you know, we virtually get zero training on any of this. And so I think, you know, don't be in a hurry to fast. The play on words within the article is like, it can be an effective and amazing tool, but really know what you're doing, especially if you're a physician who hasn't gone through a weight loss journey or hasn't used intermittent fasting as a tool to improve your metabolic health. That there's a lot of tips. I kind of poured everything I know about fasting and have learned through my own experience and working with patients. As a disclaimer, my platform is called IME Community. It's a life and weight coaching platform that's all web-based for teens. So I do not recommend fasting for teens.
All right, so let's talk more into your article and go into more detail about fasting. And before we do that, tell us what is the information that's out there. So if a typical patient goes on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, what kind of information are they inundated with regards to fasting?
It's going to be the extremes like we have, you know, with diet culture or the body positive, which, you know, I'm a huge supporter of the body positive movement and working really hard to cancel diet culture. But my whole platform is to let's meet in the middle. Like you can be body positive, feel great. In fact, that's what it takes, self-love superpower, and also reach your health goals. So they're not mutually exclusive things. So you see the people who are like, okay, really fixated on the how, stuck in diet culture, saying, okay, you can do this fasting, and they're, you know, the Instagram wellness perfection folks that are like, oh, here's what I'm doing. And, you know, they're cropping their shots and it's all fakeness, you know, and then you get the extreme of like any intentional weight loss, any intentional improvements in your health. And I think that the health system and us as physicians, we have to take a responsibility for why, you know, patients feel this way, that there's really nothing out there that is helpful. And so then the other extreme is like fasting is just starving yourself and is going to cause harm. And I mean, it's true that people who have tried it like on their own without a coach, without a physician who knows what they're doing, or a dietitian who's really knowledgeable about fasting, it can really, especially if you have a history, trigger binge eating disorder or get you into that restrictive space. So, you know, it's kind of the extremes, and there's not a lot in the middle that's like super helpful, just like everything else.
All right. So in your article, you give us some reputable pieces of advice about fasting. So talk more about that.
Well, for instance, fasting is a great tool. When you look at Dr. Jason Fung's book, The Obesity Code, he really upended the status quo of diet culture and calories in, calories out thinking, and that we should be eating small meals frequently throughout the day. And when you look at insulin resistance, which is an incredible adaptation of our bodies to constantly high levels of insulin, and our bodies were not meant to be exposed to that. I mean, our bodies are really efficient with our hormones. So insulin is supposed to have peaks and valleys and times when we're not exposed to insulin so that we can mobilize our fat stores for energy, and that keeps you at your healthy weight set point range, which your body does have. So he said, obesity is hormonal. It's not just caloric. You don't just look at total calories. All calories aren't created equal. So you have to look at the quality and the composition of the food that you're eating, so the calories, and so the what to eat. And then you have to look at the timing of your eating, because to address the high levels of insulin, look at what you're eating. To address the constantly elevated levels of insulin, you have to look at the timing.
All right. So let's go into more detail. So if I, as a primary care doctor, wanted to correctly implement fasting into a patient's plan, what's the right way to go about that?
Well, first I would read the Obesity Code. I would also read his book, The Complete Guide to Fasting. So you just learn more about it and educate yourself. And then the other thing is, none of us get much training on motivational interviewing, but that's a way to start, to get a way to ask open-end questions, see where your patient is, see what their why is, know what patients to work with. So if they have insulin resistance, they're overweight, they have metabolic health issues, obviously you have their labs, fasting can be added as a tool. And make sure that you tell your patients, like, this is a tool and it's not meant to be restrictive. And you need to have a lot of support and follow up and communication with your patient if you're going to implement fasting. The first thing, and I said this in the article, and I really experienced this myself, is most of us who are overweight, maybe have insulin resistance, are carb adapted. So our bodies are used to seeing, carbohydrate and just using that as our energy source to create ATP. So we're a sugar burner. We're not used to mobilizing our fat stores for energy. So the first step is to really dial in, I call it dialing in, on quality food. Okay, so transitioning from eating more of the ultra processed foods with refined sugars and processed carbs, trans fats, and salt, which are very addictive, and our brains are conditioned to eat. So this can be tough, but know that it's transitional to eat more of a balance of complex carbohydrate, add in protein and healthy fat every time you're eating. And so it takes 4 to 6 weeks. At least it took my body longer, I think, to become fat adapted. And people say, how do you know you're fat adapted? Well, it's awesome. Because you feel better. Like you can tell your blood sugars are stable. You, instead of having like tsunamis of hunger waves, you have like a little wave, and then it's like, oh, it's fine, and you really learn to be, what we call like an intuitive eater, and to really have more of a connection to your body and honor your hunger.
So you mentioned close follow-up is essential if one were to incorporate fasting as a tool. So give us an idea of what you mean by that.
Well, I think you need to touch base with people. I mean, at least, weekly, and have them come in for a, follow-up visits every month at least. And if you have a dietitian you can refer them to that insurance will cover, who's familiar with using fasting and taking, therapeutic carbohydrate reduction approach. I will also tell you, I'm a founding member of the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners. You can go to the website, thesmhp.org. And those are physicians like me and healthcare providers who are looking at therapeutic carbohydrate reduction as a means to really reduce insulin resistance and an approach to improve metabolic health. And we have clinical guidelines there. So that can be super helpful for physicians, and they can work with their patients on that. Also, if they're on medication for, like, say, diabetes, you really need to follow them very closely, follow their blood sugars, because if they're going to fast, their blood sugars are going to go down. So you're probably going to be tapering off those meds.
So you mentioned teens as not being one of the demographics that's appropriate for fasting. What are some other groups where fasting also is not appropriate for?
An awesome question. So yeah, teens, and I really think like until we have our frontal lobes developed, so maybe even like mid 20s, and our society is so messed up. We're also fat phobic with internal biases and restrictive mindset and diet culture and thinking. I really think you have to work on your mindfulness, self-compassion, canceling diet culture and all its harms from your life before you even consider any sort of intentional weight loss or using fasting as a tool. Anyone who's had a history of an eating disorder, obviously if you're a binger, it's going to create more indulgence restriction mindset. You never want to use fasting as like a punishment or a restriction. That'll backfire. That is starvation. So for instance, if you decide to fast for maybe like do a 16 and an 8 and it's your first time doing it, and then you get really hungry and shaky and you need to break your fast, then don't punish yourself like the next day with another fast. Just plan on eating, just move along. You're just gathering evidence. There's nothing going wrong. So the coaching is really helpful for that. I think that physicians, we're just, hyper competitive, overachievers, and, we're motivated with our negative self-talk and our inner critic. So if you don't have the tools of self-compassion, if you haven't leaned into that in your life, I think that fasting could be harmful.
We're talking to Karla Lester. She's a pediatrician, and she wrote the KevinMD article, "Don't Be in a Hurry to Fast." Karla, talk to all the patients who may be listening to this podcast and they come across Instagram and they see a post about how great intermittent fasting is, or a fasting related post. What kind of questions should they be asking after they come across this on social media?
Oh, that's great. So I think that, you have to be mindful. We all have to be mindful of our inputs and our outputs and where we get our information. So one thing I've been doing is saying, okay, follow this RD. She's really awesome. Or follow this therapist, follow this obesity medicine doc. So first of all, be really mindful. Make sure that if they're a dietitian, that they're not a nutritionist, that they're an actual registered dietitian who's giving information. Make sure that they have, studies. If you say, can you direct me to a study? And I would really look to maybe the American Board of Obesity Medicine, if you're looking for a doctor in your area who you want to connect with, who can give you the tools, because we're trained when we take our boards through the ABOM on all the things that work. So like the self-monitoring, the accountability, the tracking, determining your own measures of success. And so that could be really helpful too.
And my final question, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
Well, I think that just like anything else, it's now time for us as physicians to start being really helpful to our patients in addressing this. We had historically gotten a lot of stuff wrong. We haven't challenged, diet culture. We brought it into our practices. We've had a more compliance-based approach with our patients where we kind of tell them what to do and expect them to change their behavior for us to feel a certain way about ourselves and our practice of medicine. And I think we just need to really recognize that we've gotten a lot of it wrong, and we need to lean in, to be curious, to find some tools and to see, offer things that can be really helpful and that will really work for our patients.
Karla, thank you so much for joining me again, sharing your time and insight.